Hi, I'm Mike and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to rank the Amicus portmanteau horror anthology films. I've loved these films ever since I was a child. Yes, I was watching horror films when I was a child, and they've remained amongst my favourites. What they were a series of films made in the 60s and 70s by the rival studio to Hammer, who were called Amicus. And they hit on this formula that was really popular of doing a story which has an overarching story where usually it's four unsuspecting ordinary people meet some kind of carnival, sideshow, fortune teller, or some mysterious man in a train carriage, or a mysterious monk who tells them their future and where their lives are going. And it's always into some really horrible, weird story. And of course, at the end, you find out they're really going to hell, and that this person who's been telling their future is either the devil or death. So that's the formula, and then in between that story, you see lots of little stories that are segments that are put in with famous guest stars having various horrible things done to them. And I really love this series. I love it for two reasons. First of all, the first reason is because it brought a new kind of horror to British cinema. It took like writers like Robert Bloch from America who were writing modern horror stories, or EC Comics, and it put those stories in the kind of lurid world of Hammer horror colours and directing style. So you had that kind of gothic style with a very sort of modern horror feel. So you often had things like vampires and werewolves and so on, but done in a modern take, in a sort of 60s, 70s take as well. That was very exciting about it. And the other thing is that they were always stuffed full of great British character actors, just doing a little job, for two bob a week. You had Denham Elliott and Michael Gough just turning up, Peter Cushing and Crystal Lee in almost every movie. But, a whole range of people were in these movies. Denham Elliott was in them, John Pertwee turns up, Tom Baker turns up, Terry Thomas, amazing cast list, and all really good actors, really enjoying themselves. So let's get on with ranking them. There's 7 official films to get through. I'm not going to include the Monster Club, but there's 7 official films to get through. So I'm going to rank them from worst to best. Now, the second film, Torture Garden, is my bottom choice. I've never really got on with this film. Some people rate this film very highly. It was directed by Freddie Francis, and it has a very celebrated story, the final story, where this guy loves Edgar Allan Poe so much that he's collected all these ephemera of Edgar Allan Poe's through the years, including Edgar Allan Poe himself, who he's got downstairs in this kind of crypt, with sort of this kind of mummified corpse that comes to life. It's a very odd story. Some people rate it very highly. It doesn't really do it for me. There's also a piano that moves by itself and kills people. It's that kind of movie. Burgess Meredith plays a carnival huckster who brings people into his little tent, and they have their fortunes told by a lady dressed up as Fate. In the end, he turns out to be the devil. So it's fun. It's nicely directed by Freddie Francis, but I think the stories are a bit weak and not very memorable. So this is my number 7 choice. Now, number 6 is From Beyond the Grave. I love this movie. It's based on stories by Chetwynd Hayes, wonderful name, and it's very well directed, film by a guy called Kevin Connor. Now this was the last in the series, and it's a very sort of muted, quiet film which adds to its sense of creepiness. It stars Peter Cushing as this rather sinister antiques dealer, and all the people who come into his shop try and sort of diddle him in some way. So the antiques that they buy take their revenge. The best story is not really a horror story, and it's got a brilliant cast: Ian Bannon, Diana Dawes, Donald Pleasance and his daughter Angela Pleasance. And it's really a sort of nasty, weird, cynical little tale, something out of Tales of the Unexpected. This guy who's sick of his wife, his nagging wife, and he meets this old soldier selling matchsticks outside a train station, and he's drawn into this old soldier's life and the life he has with his mysterious daughter who casts a spell over Ian Bannon. It's not really a horror story, but It's actually the most creepiest episode in the whole film, and it's great fun and it's brilliantly acted. The rest of the stories are fine. There's a suit that I've made of dead skin that animates anything that goes into it. There's a mirror that turns David Warner into a killer, and there's a door that leads into another dimension. It's all very beautifully directed. It's all very creepy. It just doesn't have the same impact on me as some of the other movies. At number 5, here's my double bill. It's this one here, Vault of Horror. I feel bad putting this at number 5 because I love this film so much. This film has Terry Thomas and Tom Baker in it. How can it lose? It also has one of the best openings of any movie I've ever seen. 5 men getting into a lift. It's amazing. What a credit sequence that is. And you've got this really powerful, bombastic music in the background. And it literally is just 5 men getting in a lift. And it's so cheap that they don't even bother to change the outside of the lift when the doors close. So it's the same piece of set. I mean, you've got to love that sort of thing. The stories are great fun. I really like this one. I like the idea of 5 people in a tower block and they go down into the cellar and it's actually this crypt and they tell each other their dreams. The Terry Thomas story is very funny and memorable. The Tom Baker story is absolutely fantastic and one of my favourite stories in this whole range. He's this painter who decides to take revenge on the people who've defrauded him out of all his money, and he can paint with this voodoo power, and then if he rips off a piece of the painting, their hands will get chopped off or their head will get chopped off. It's great fun, and Tom Baker's very good in it. He wears a terrible suit, but he's very good in it. And his villains just happen to include Denham Elliott. Amazing. So, Vault of Horror, very underrated in my opinion. Great fun, a great cult classic with a fantastic opening sequence. Next up, in number 4th position, is The House That Dripped Blood. This is a movie that goes up and up in my estimation every year. I really like the feel of this film. I really like the way it's directed. I love where it's located. I think it's in a house in Bray that was maybe part of Hammer Studios. Someone watching the video might correct me on that. Beautiful old house. You really have the feel of an English country town with this old house on the outskirts. And it's got a genuinely creepy atmosphere. Great cast. Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, Nairi Dawn Porter's in it, John Pertwee's in it, Ingrid Pitt's in it. Wonderful, wonderful cast. The Peter Cushing story, when he goes into the local town and there's a weird waxworks museum about killers and various horrors through the centuries. I mean, if only local towns in England really did have waxwork museums like that. But that story has a weird, strange kind of erotic, oddball feel about it. And I love the story about Christopher Lee and his daughter who's actually a witch, which is great fun. The comedy one that comes at the end, inadvisedly, I think, with John Pertwee and Ingrid Pitt, when he puts on a cloak that turns him into a vampire, is a bit rubbish, but great fun. I like this movie more and more, and I like the story, the overarching story with John Bennett as a hapless police chief. It's well worth checking out. 3rd on my list, and I go back to the original, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. The best title for a movie ever. This is the original. 5 men get on a train carriage. A young Donald Sutherland, Christopher Lee, Roy Castle. Yes, Roy Castle is the comedy relief. For those of you who are not English, he was a jazz musician who became a children's presenter. There's also Alan Freeman, who was a DJ at the time. So it's a very strange cast. But in amongst them is Dr. Schreck, Peter Cushing, who plays this German tarot fortune teller. And he gets out his tarot cards and starts telling their future. Und now, you. This film is so great. It's the original. It's one of the best. I love all the stories. I love the atmosphere of the whole film. The Christopher Lee story, which is also weirdly about painting, where the hand of Michael Gough, this painter who he's ridiculed, comes back to get revenge on him, is by far and away the best story, and it's very entertaining. It really has that feel of the EC comics, which were not very well known in those days in England. And I just love this movie. Great atmosphere and great cast. So my second place is Asylum. I actually think this is probably the best of the movies, to be honest. I mean, God, if you're a horror fan, you can't deny this movie. It starts with Night on a Bold Mountain with Mussorgsky. It doesn't try to be subtle. It just goes straight in there. It's set in a lunatic asylum. And is it Patrick McGee, wonderful actor, is trying to convince Robert Powell, another wonderful actor. Robert Powell is a new young doctor to this asylum. So what he does is he tells him to go upstairs and try and work out which one of the inmates used to be a doctor who has now gone mad. And he's shown round by Catweasel, Jeffrey Baildon, and he goes and looks at these 4 stories. Each of the 4 stories is terrific and very well acted. Charlotte Rampling's in the cast, Herbert Lom, amazing cast. And the first story, Richard Todd, who was a famous actor, Dam Busters, he has a story where he kills his wife and he wraps her up in brown parcel paper, and the bits of her body, he cuts her up and puts her in the freezer, and the bits of her body start coming to life. I can honestly say that genuinely frightened me as a kid. Some people think these movies are not frightening, but for a kid, that was a very frightening episode. It's a very atmospheric film, great fun, great ending in the overarching story. In fact, this is the only one, I think, one of 2 where the overarching story actually bleeds into the mini-stories. And it's a lot of fun. I love this film. I think it's probably the best, actually, of them all. It was directed by Roy Ward Baker, I think. Yeah, good old Roy Ward Baker. Fresh off Quatermass and the Pit. It's a great movie, great fun. But my number one, for sentimental reasons, I'm going back to my double bill. Yes, it's Tales from the Crypt. Oh my God. Again, totally unsubtle. Starts off with Bach, Staccato and Fugue in a graveyard that is, of course, Highgate Cemetery, with a monk wandering around amongst the tombstones. It's just brilliant. And then, even better, the overarching story is that a group of adults just happen to find themselves going on a tour of this cemetery. As you do. That's what people do. They go into a tomb, and there's Ralph Richardson, and he's a crypt keeper. It just gets better and better. Each of the stories is terrific fun. Joan Collins gets chased around her house by a psychotic Santa. Ian Hendry turns into a walking corpse after a car crash, and you see the whole story through his eyes. Then there's the wonderful Peter Cushing story where he is an old guy living in his house on his own, and he likes entertaining the local children. I don't think you could make it now. And this guy wants to get him out of his house, this property developer. It's kind of a very modern story, actually. Sets out this rumour that he's a paedophile, that he's a dodgy guy. Cushing kills himself and then comes back from the grave. It's a wonderful story. And the ending is that he gets this guy, and the father of the property developer comes down in the morning, opens this parcel. There's this guy's heart. But even better, the heart is still beating. That's good horror. The 4th story is very stupid. It's an update of Monk is Poor, and I absolutely love it. It's so ridiculous. It has a guy chased in his Bentley by this motorcyclist who is clearly wearing a cloth face made up to look like a skull. He crashes his car. His wife wishes him back from the dead. In he comes, brought in by pallbearers in a coffin. Then she wishes him back alive. And of course he's got the embalming fluid inside his body, so he's writhing in pain. It's fantastic fun. And then finally, my absolute single favourite story in the whole anthology series, which is the one where there's an old general from the army is put in charge of a blind people's home, and he treats them like dirt, so they take revenge, and they kidnap his dog, and they imprison him in a dungeon, and they starve the dog for days on end, and then unleash it on him. But there's also another little twist. That story has been my favourite story in this anthology series forever and a day. I just love it to pieces. I think it's a brilliant little piece of mini horror. So I don't think Tales from the Crypt is necessarily the best directed film or the most brilliant story writing, but I do think it's the most entertaining. So that's my number one in the Amicus Horror Anthology. Do let me know in the comments down below what your order is, whether you like the Amicus films, which one you particularly like, and I'll see you next time.